Doing tonight something on Shavuos, Shavuos special. And in order to do that, we need to look in Sofer Shmos. So please turn, if you've got the Chumash, you don't need it, but if you've got the Chumash, then if you turn to Parshas Mishpatim, I'm looking at chapter 24, towards the end of Parshas Mishpatim, verse Pasuk Yud Aleph, 11. Let me just find it myself. Yeah, so this is the latter part of Parshas Mishpatim, which picks up the narrative about Matan Torah. And so if you are with me in the Stone Chumash, to be exact, we're looking at page 442. So again, it's Shmos Perek Chaf Daled Pasuk Yud Aleph, Exodus chapter 24, verse 11. Now, the Torah here returns to elaborate further on the Matan Torah description. And it says, let's actually take it from Pasuk Yud, the very last words on the previous page on 440. Vayur'u es Elohei Yisrael, they saw the God of Israel, v'sachas raglav k'maseh livnas hasapir, u'che'etzem hashemayim latohar. It is a metaphorical description of what they beheld when they viewed the image of God. Again, it's using metaphorical language. We don't need to dwell on that. But what the Torah says in the next pasuk is very interesting and is variously interpreted. Ve'el atzilei b'nei Yisrael lo shalach yado. Against the nobility, the great men, like the elite of the children of Israel, lo shalach yado. God did not stretch out his hand. V'yechazu ha'elohim v'yuchlu v'yishtu. They saw God, and they ate and they drank. Broadly speaking, there are two schools of interpretation. One possibility is that they acted improperly. They saw the God of Israel. They experienced this remarkable, extraordinary, spiritual, prophetic experience, but they ate and they drank. In other words, they were callous about it. They treated a spiritual high as an opportunity for physical indulgence. And in looking at it that way, implies that they were deserving, or they may be worthy of some extending of God's hand, which is an expression of rebuke or punishment even. But God delayed it. So that's how Rashi interprets it, actually. And Rashi says that Hashem did not want to compromise or to ruin the experience, the joy and the exuberance and the spiritual high that the whole nation experienced. And therefore, Nadav and Avihu, to which this is a remez, paid the price later on when they brought that unauthorized offering. Okay, I'm only saying this by way of background. Excuse me, the other school of thought, I think it's in Targum here. Targum says, Vahavu chadan bekarbanehen, they were joyous in the offering that they brought, this kabbalah, that it was accepted favorably, ki'ilu achlen v'shasan, as if they ate and they drank. So according to the Targum, I think Rashi quotes that as well, as another option, interpretation. According to the Targum, this represents the other school of thought. The Torah here is praising them. When it says they ate and they drank, it doesn't mean that they were callous or seeking physical indulgence, but on the contrary, it's a metaphor as if they were eating and drinking. They were nourished spiritually. They didn't need to eat or drink because they were on such a spiritual high, in which case they are being praised. Ramban, however, says the following. Ramban, and this is how we're doing Ksav Sofer, of course, but Ksav Sofer quotes Ramban. And Ramban says that they ate and they drank as a Sudas mitzvah. Again, they were on such a high, they gazed at God, they were given a vision, which the implication is it goes beyond what all of the Jewish people experienced. These were the most advanced, the elite, the most spiritually like alert and sensitive, the most spiritually capable. So they experienced a kind of encounter with God that goes beyond what the rest of Klal Yisrael had. And they had this vision of Hashem, and they ate and they drank, says Ramban, as a Sudas mitzvah to celebrate the occasion. So Ksav Sofer asks, well, if that's the case, then why does the Torah imply, according to this approach, that they were deserving of punishment? It could be that Ramban is holding, like the Targum, that it was a way of saying they were praised. But according to Targum, they did not really eat and drink. It was just a metaphor. They were nourished spiritually, and it was as if they ate and they drank. They felt on such a spiritual, exalted plane. It was as if they ate and they drank. That's how the Targum understands it. Ramban wants to take it at face value. They ate and they drank. Why? Not out of callous disregard for the spirituality of it, but in celebration of it. It's a Sudas mitzvah. We celebrate many occasions in the Jewish calendar when a person's life of joy and spiritual achievement are celebrated with eating and drinking. At a wedding, at a bris, that's a Sudas mitzvah, at a Pidyon haben, at a Shavar Bachos, on Shabbos, on Yom Tov. These are all occasions where it's a mitzvah to eat and to drink. Maybe the paradigm is the Seder night, where it's actually the Torah itself requires us to eat matzah. Okay, I'm not saying matzah is the most indulgent food, probably not. But even so, the mitzvah of celebrating the Pesach experience, together with recalling the Yetzias Mitzrayim, is eating and drinking. Okay, the wine is only rabbinic, but it is not a inconsistent with Jewish practice and Jewish religious prescription to eat and drink as part of a mitzvah, as part of a celebration of a mitzvah. But if that, and that's how Ramban understands it. So Ksav Sofer says, if that's the case, then why does the Torah imply that they were maybe deserving of punishment? That is to say, Hashem delayed or refrained from punishing them, even though maybe they were deserving of punishment. According to Rambam, where's the reason for the punishment? The answer Ksav Sofer advances is a fascinating one. And with this, he sheds light on one of the well-known midrashim. I'm sure you've come across it from a novel and a creative point of view. The Gemara in Shabbos on page 88, one of the very famous passages in the Talmud, familiar to us all, is that when Hashem proposed to give the Torah to the Jewish people, it says, "V'yamdu mitachti sahar." They stood at the foot of the mountain. Literally means they stood underneath the mountain. Rashi's the Gemara says that Hashem suspended the mountain over their heads like an enormous wine cask, and he said, "If you receive the Torah, that's great. If not, you'll be buried right here. I'll put this mountain down, and that will be the end of you." According to that, they accepted the Torah under duress. Okay, a very famous Gemara. So Ksav Sofer says the following: if the Jewish people accepted the Torah under duress, then it is the nature of a person who does something out of compulsion, reluctantly. He does something because he's compelled to, maybe on pain of death. Whether he does signs away his rights to some property, or he commits himself to a lifetime of some commitment that he doesn't really want to undertake, and he's forced to do so on pain of death. He loses his appetite in a heartbeat. He's in no mood to celebrate. That's what Ksav Sofer says. So it's the nature of a person. He says he food and drink have no appeal to him at that moment. He loses his appetite. If you think about some of the Jewish art dealers or art collectors in the Nazi era, in the prelude to the Nazi era, when they were trying to leave Germany if they could, and they were essentially forced to sell valuable property, not only artwork, it was other things as well. It was factories, it was real estate, and they were forced to sell it at a fraction of its genuine value. It was a sale under duress. You can imagine the anguish that they would have experienced in doing so. Says Ksav Sofer, obviously not referring to the Nazi era, that they lost their appetite entirely if they had accepted the Torah under duress. So he says that that was the case for the Hamon Yisrael, the Jewish people collectively, like the rank and file. They were reluctant. They were very ambivalent, maybe, about receiving the Torah, about accepting the Torah, and they were forced to do so. They only did it, as we say, under duress, because they were compelled to do so. They lost their appetite. But Elatzilei b'nei Israel, but Hashem did not punish Atzilei b'nei Israel because they ate and they drank, meaning for them it was a celebration. They were not accepting the Torah reluctantly under duress. They accepted the Torah with joy and with gratitude, with appreciation, and in a spirit of celebration. So that's what the Torah says. Elatzilei b'nei Israel, he didn't have to threaten them. The nobility, Nadav and Avihu and the other distinguished people, they're not described, or they're not identified by name, but other great people, they ate and they drank because that is a symbol, that is an indicator of their joy in receiving the Torah. And with that, says Iksav Sofer, we can understand why the Gemara says that when it comes to Yom Tov, the approach that is recommended to experiencing the regel is to divide one's time and energy between spiritual activities like tefillah or Torah study on the one hand, in addition to sleeping and things which a person has to do of necessity. And so that's called Chatzi Lashem, devoting your energies to serving God, but Chatzi Lachem, and part of it for yourself, for eating and drinking, celebrating, and doing things which are the pleasing aspects of Yom Tov. Of course, ideally, the service of Hashem should be a source of joy as well, but the Gemara doesn't assume that everybody gets a high or gets sort of physical pleasure or nourishment from Avodas Hashem. Or even if they do, it's in a certain way. When a person eats a tasty meal and he enjoys good wine or whiskey or whatever he enjoys, and if you're a vegetarian, I'm sure there are vegetarian delicacies as well. I have some myself over the years. That is called pleasure. So that's what the Gemara says, that part for Hashem and part for you. But there's machlokas, maybe it should be all to one, all the other. So the Gemara says, and this is the famous turn of phrase, that everyone agrees when it comes to Shavuos that one has to divide his time between service of God and service of myself. That's my celebration of Atzeres. So even though with the other festivals, there is a school of thought that says you should just spend your time in prayer and tefillah or tehillim or Torah, and you only eat what you need to eat as a sort of, necessity, what your person eats day by day, but you don't indulge. That there's such a school of thought, but when it comes to Shavuos, everyone agrees you've got to indulge as well. That's part of the mitzvah, part of the celebration. So Ksav Sofer says this is why, because we want to show that on Shavuos, we are happy about receiving the Torah. When we think back to those events that happened 3,300 years ago, we don't look at it in a rueful manner, in an ambivalent manner, partially regretting what happened. On the contrary, we celebrated, we are delighted, and just as, says Iksav Sofer, Atzilei b'nei Israel, they ate and they drank, and that showed that they're happy to receive the Torah. We're the same. And that's why everyone agrees, all the opinions in the Talmud concur that when it comes to Shavuos, one should definitely divide his time, and part of the time should definitely be devoted to the things that your person enjoys, whether taking a nap or taking a walk in the park if it's a beautiful day, or spending time with his family and friends, eating and drinking. That is called Chatzi Lechem. Everyone agrees, because that shows that we are joyful. He adds on one last further thought here along the same lines. He says, maybe this is why Mordechai, when he was formulating the celebration of Purim, he did so in such a way that the Mishteh Simcha, the eating and the drinking, even on Purim, is an essential part of the celebration. Maybe he did so because on Purim we accepted the Torah anew. Kimu v'kiblu. That was the subsequent, that was the sequel to receiving the Torah on Har Sinai. The Gemara actually says that even though they received the Torah on Har Sinai under duress, but later on, hundreds of years later, in the days of Achashverosh, we accepted the Torah willingly and out of love of the miracle. It says Sofer, maybe that's why Mordechai incorporated into the essential way that we mark and that we celebrate Purim is with eating and drinking in order to show the same idea that it's true when we first received the Torah was under duress, but now we're doing it with gusto, and the eating and drinking shows that we're pleased with receiving the Torah. Because again, if a person does something only under duress, if he enters into some kind of agreement or commitment or treaty or covenant that he doesn't really want to do, he loses his appetite, he's not in the mood for eating or drinking. Okay, that's the first thing I wanted to share with you. I think it's a beautiful thought about the explaining how the Jewish people received the Torah on Shavuos, and we look back and say, well, we do it with gusto now. Okay, I want to share with you a further idea. A beautiful thought that Kasav Sofer quotes in the name of his father. The Chassam Sofer wrote quite extensively, but if I'm not mistaken, actually, I read, if I'm not mistaken, that most of his writings were only published after his lifetime, after his passing. So he may have prepared them for publication, but he hadn't actually edited them and taken them to the printer. My point is that the teachings of Chassam Sofer that are recorded here by his son, many of them probably were what he learned from his father. So although many of them do appear, not all, but many of them do appear in his printed commentaries and writings, but the way Ksav Sofer presents them are not always identical to the way they appear in print. But that's just as a side observation. So he shares an idea which is found in Parshas Yisro. So turn back a few pages to chapter 19, verse 15. If you've got the Art Scrolls Chumash, then it is going to be on page 404. So here the Torah says, well, actually, the Jewish people are instructed to prepare themselves for 3 days. Truthfully, Ksav Sofer, what I want to share with you right now, is part of a longer, extended treatment of Ksav Sofer, which relates to those words in the pasuk. But I'm not going to explore to delve into the depths of what Ksav Sofer says. I want to tell you the kernel of it, the beautiful insight which he quotes in the name of his father, even though he uses it as part of as I say, a larger structure. He says that his father, Chassam Sofer, wants to explain, or he bases his explanation upon the pasuk in Tehillim. And that pasuk is Magid Varav leYaakov Chukav uMishpatav leYisrael. He tells his words to Jacob, his ordinances and his laws to Israel. Lo asa chen lechol goy uMishpatim bal yidaun. He didn't do this for every nation. He did not tell them of the Mishpatim, Bal Yidaum. He did not inform the nations of the world about the Mishpatim. This is a pasuk which should be familiar to us all. We say it in the morning prayers in Pesukei de Zimra, on Shabbos, on Yom Tov, and indeed every day. So it should be familiar. I'll just tell you where it is. You want to look it up. It's Tehillim 147, Tehillim chapter 147, verse 19. And as I said, it appears in the daily tefillah as well. I'll just say it again. Magid varav leYaakov chukav mishpatav liYisrael lo asachen lechol goy mishpatim bal gidaum. Says the Chassam Sofer that this pasuk says that essentially Hashem gave the Torah to Israel, didn't give it to other people. The difficulty is, of course, another well-known medrash regarding the Matan Torah. It's actually found in the Gemara, the beginning of Tractate Avodah Zarah. And there we have the statement that when Hashem proposed to give the Torah to the Jewish people, he offered it to the other nations. And he proposed to give it to the other nations, apparently before he even offered it to the Jewish people. And each nation had an opportunity to consider it, to contemplate the contents of the Torah, to decide if they want it or they don't want it. Of course, the Gemara describes how each nation asked what's in the Torah, and one by one they said, no, we're not interested in it. The Gemara goes on to say that the purpose of this is so that when the nations of the world do not keep the Torah and they violate the Torah and they act in a way which in many ways is contradictory to the Torah, they'll be called to account. They will say, however, hey, you never gave us the Torah. If we had had the Torah with its wisdom, with its profundity, with its sanctity, we would have been very inspired. We would have embraced the Torah. We would have lived by the Torah. You never gave it to us. We never even had the chance. So for that reason, Hashem said, no, my friends, you did have the chance. You turned it down, so it's your own sad fault. But the nations will come back with another excuse. They'll say, well, the Jewish people accepted the Torah, and even though they haven't kept it wonderfully, but by the end of days, hopefully we'll have a generation that will keep the Torah, in a more correct manner. And they received the Torah, but they also didn't want the Torah. They only accepted the Torah because you forced it upon them. The nations will say, well, if you had forced it upon us, we would have taken it, and then we would have had it. We would have lived our lives much better. So you kept the Torah from us, and the Jewish people also didn't want the Torah, but you forced it upon them. So that's what the Gemara says. Now, the interesting thing is that Ramban says that this well-known drash that we mentioned about the mountain suspended over their heads like a barrel, according to Ramban, he quotes the Medrash Tanchuma because this statement is really, although it's very familiar, but of course is highly problematic as well, because the Torah itself praises the Jewish people for their acceptance of the Torah. The famous Naaseh v'nishma, and the Gemara asked that. Actually, Tosfos asked that question. So Tosfos answers, and Ramban says the same answer, based on the Medrash Tanchuma in Parshas Noach, that when the Torah says that they were when the Torah says they accepted the Torah willingly and of their own free will, that means the Torah should be ksav, the written Torah. Because the written Torah is not that difficult to understand, has verses in it which prescribe laws which are so compelling, so sensible, which are essential for establishing a just society. And of course, there's a lot of narrative parts in the Torah. It tells us a lot of, early human history, creation of the world. Basically, the written Torah has a lot to commend it, and anybody who leafs through the page, I'm elaborating a bit, will say, hey, this is quite good stuff. It's got a lot of commandments which would be very good for us all to uphold. It would be better for the society. The belief in one God is much better than the crass paganism going around in the world. That we like that. But the Torah Shebaal Peh they didn't want, because Torah Shebaal Peh, the oral Torah, much more demanding, much more intellectually rigorous and intellectually overwhelming. Also, it has so many details and so many requirements. When you read the Torah itself, the written Torah, many of the mitzvahs, not all, but many of them are not that difficult to fulfill if you just take them at face value, if you just take them superficially. But when you look at the oral Torah, you realize how much more there is in it. So they were reluctant to take the oral Torah. That's what the Ramban says, and that's what the Medrash says. That they accepted the written Torah, that was Naaseh v'nishma. The Torah Shebaal Peh they didn't want to take. Tosfos answers that, quotes that same idea in Masechta Shabbos as well. So says Iksav Sofer, if that's the case, when when the nations of the world say, well, if we had been forced to accept the Torah, we would have accepted it as well. But what about the Torah Shebiksav? The Torah Shebiksav they also didn't want. And that the Jewish people did accept willingly, according to this explanation of Ramban, that the compulsion, the duress, was only pertinent to the oral Torah, but the written Torah they accepted. Okay, this is all in the Chasam Sofer. And he explains it, he illustrates this with a beautiful mashal. So it says a Ksav Sofer, it says a Chasam Sofer, it's quoted as I said in Ksav Sofer. He says that what Hashem did for the Jewish people. So why is it that the Jewish people accepted Torah B'Ksav willingly? The nations of the world, even Torah B'Ksav, they didn't want. Why didn't they want it? Why didn't they also take a look at it? And when you think about it, my friends, the Torah B'Ksav actually has become very much coveted by the nations of the world. Since the Torah was translated into Greek, it has been seized upon and has been embraced, albeit abused and distorted, but it has been utilized and has been like selectively embraced by the Christians and by the Muslims, and that is the majority of humanity right there. Okay, it took a while for it to happen. So my point is that actually Torah Shebiksav has proven to be quite popular, but originally, according to what the Medrash says, when Hashem proposed it to the Moabites and to the Edomites and to the Yishmaelim, nobody wanted it at that time. Why didn't they want the written Torah? So here's where the Chasam Sofer has a very insightful parable. He said there was once a king, and the king, or person doesn't have to be a king, he had a favorite son, and he was going to bequeath his estate to his children, but he had one son who was a favorite. He wanted to give him the best. But he, of course, inevitably, the other ones are going to protest and say, it's not fair. Why are you favoring that son? So the king had gold mines. It was part of his estate, and he wanted to bequeath them to his favorite son. And he didn't want the other sons to have it. So what did he do? He said to his son, you know what? I'm going to give you this gold mine, or a few gold mines that I have, wherever they are, in Australia, in Africa, wherever they may be. And they're very valuable. But you've got to know how to extract the gold from the mine. You've got to know how to extract it, how to refine it, how to separate the gold from the residue and everything else. And then once you have the gold, you need to know how to work the gold. And then it's very, very valuable. A gold mine is worth, a vast fortune if you know what to do with it. So that son, he taught what to do with it. So when the time came and he was either, before his death or whatever occasion it was, and he's now giving us, so he says to his sons collectively, I've got gold mines. Are you interested? So they went to see it. There's a big hole in the ground, or maybe not even a hole in the ground. And, they were told in this soil, in this rocky earth is gold. But they thought to themselves, how am I going to extract the gold? I don't really see any gold here. To get the gold out is such a lot of work. I don't even know how to do it. I'm not interested. I'll take the cash, or I'll take something else of value. So they did. But of course, the one who knew what to do with it, he was very happy with it. And he got a team in to mine the gold, and he was very pleased with the results. Says the Chasam Sofer in explaining the Nimshal, he says the Torah Sheba'al Peh is the key to understanding the Torah Shebiksav. Actually, despite what I said a few minutes ago, that superficially you can read the Torah and realize that there are some very sensible mitzvahs there, very valuable, very worthwhile, a very successful formula for establishing a just society and service of God. But actually, such an understanding is so superficial as to be completely inadequate. Says a Chasam Sofer, there's hardly a mitzvah in the Torah that you can fulfill without the Torah Sheba'al Peh. A very good example is tefillin. Tefillin is a mitzvah which a man performs every weekday. And although nowadays we only do it for half an hour or an hour during the morning prayers, but in earlier times a man would wear tefillin throughout the day. It's a very precious mitzvah, and it's a mitzvah that a person fulfills, as I say, all the time, during the daylight. Anyway, what is tefillin? The Torah itself prescribes the mitzvah of tefillin. It doesn't say what they are. This is all in the Torah Sheba'al Peh. And actually the same is true for almost all the mitzvahs of the Torah, even the ones which are very straightforward, like do not kill or do not murder. But what about the court that executes a criminal? What about someone who acts in self-defense? What about someone who kills a pursuer who wants to kill another person? And similar other questions like that. Now, the resolution to those questions requires a thorough study and analysis of Torah Sheba'al Peh. Besides which, the method of Torah Sheba'al Peh involves Gezerah Shava, Hekesh, Smuchin, Notricon, Gematria. I don't have time to translate all of those terms, but suffice to say that once the Torah is translated into another language, one loses, even the most thorough scholar is deprived of a way of understanding how the oral Torah explains the written Torah, because the words are rendered into Greek or some other foreign language. And therefore, the similarity of words and so many other things are no longer accessible to a person. The bottom line is that the nations of the world did not want the written Torah because they realized, after thinking about it more closely, that without the oral Torah, they don't even know what to do with it. So they said it's not for us. The Jewish people, the reason they accepted the Torah Shebiksav willingly is because they had been given the Torah Sheba'al Peh. Now, maybe the Torah Sheba'al Peh, as we said, was forced upon them according to the Medrash, but nevertheless, once they had the oral Torah, they had the capacity to understand and to interpret and to apply the Torah itself. So that's how the Chassam Sofer explains it. Magid Varav LeYaakov, Chukav Mishpatav Israel. He says Chukav Mishpatav refers to the key to understanding the commandments of the Torah. Mishpatim refer to commandments for which you can understand the reason. It's like a code for the reasons for the commandments, because the Mishpatim, the reason is pretty straightforward. May not be the whole reason, but at least the value of the obligation to pay a worker on time, the prohibition against fraud, and so many other mitzvahs in that category. The reason for it is obvious, even if there may be further reasons as well. So it says a Chassam Sofer, Chukavu Mishpatav Israel alludes to the understanding of the reason for the commandments that underlies the written Torah. Lo asachen lechol goy umishpatim bal yidom. God didn't do that for the other nations. Yes, he offered the written Torah to them, but he did not give them the key to understand the written Torah. And therefore they didn't want it, and therefore the Jewish people are the ones who have the Torah and no one else has it. And by the way, even though the Christians and the Muslims and any other person who has the ability to read any language in the world can read the Torah, in a translation of some sort, but that understanding is always going to be superficial, is always going to be flawed and inadequate, and it's only the Torah Sheba'al Peh which is the true key to the written Torah. Time is pretty much up. I just want to end with one last thought. It doesn't come from Ksav Sofer. It comes from Kerem Hatzvi, Rabbi Tzvi Hirsch Farber. I mentioned it in a commentary in Pirkei Avos, I think 2 years ago. He has a beautiful comment about the Mishnah that says, Chaviv Yisrael, the Jewish people are beloved because Hashem gave them Klei Chemda, the precious vessel, which is the Torah. And the Mishnah goes on to say, Ki lekach tov nasati lachem, I've given you a precious acquisition, Torasi al ta'azovu, don't abandon my Torah. So he asks the same question that we have been playing with tonight, that Hashem shopped around the Torah to everybody. Nobody else wanted it. It's a bit cynical to say, but why does the Mishnah say, the Mishnah in Pirkei Avos, chapter 3, Mishnah, I'll just tell you if you want to be able to look it up. Mishnah 18. Why does the Mishnah say that the demonstration of divine love for Israel is that he gave us the Torah? And because it compares the Jewish people to mankind. The Mishnah says mankind is beloved, and then Israel is especially beloved. So he says, how can the Mishnah say that the Jewish people are especially beloved because Hashem gave us the Torah? According to the Gemara that we've been mentioning, Hashem shopped around the Torah to everybody else. They didn't want it. Nobody else would take it, so therefore we gave it to us. So, although it's a bit cynical to put it that way, but you can question, why does the Mishnah say a further demonstration of divine affection for the Jewish people is that he gave us the Torah? We were the only ones who would take it, who couldn't offload it on anybody else. Nobody else wanted it. So says Sir Hirschfarber, a beautiful idea. The Mishnah quotes the pasuk "Lekach tov nasati lechem torasi al ta'azovu." So he says that it's true. Hashem proposed to give the Torah to everybody; they didn't want it, but He just told them, "Here's the Torah. See it if you like it." What He did not reveal to them is the preciousness of the Torah. That the Torah is the means by which Hashem created heaven and earth, which is a way of saying He just gave it to them as a document. Read it, peruse it, contemplate it, consider it, decide if you like it or if you want it or you don't want it. He did not reveal to the nations of the world that this, I don't even say a document, but this Torah is the means by which Hashem created heaven and earth. It contains within it the secrets of the universe. I don't mean in a cosmological or scientific way, but the inner universe of the human being and his relationship with God. That Hashem did not reveal. Torah si al ta'azovu, says Tzvi Hirschfarber, the meaning can be understood that when a person leaves this world after 120 years, sometimes sooner, he has to leave behind all of his earthly acquisitions. He cannot take it beyond the grave. That's what it says. Torasi lekachtom nasaiti lechem torasi al ta'azovu. He has to abandon all of his earthly possessions, but torasi al ta'azovu. The Torah that you learn will escort you to the next world, like it says, v'hishaleichacha tanche osach. That when you go to the next world, the Torah will escort you. The Torah will accompany you. All of what a person achieves, all of what a person, the fortune or material possession that he amasses in this world, doesn't take it with him. He leaves it at the graveside. But Torasi al ta'azovu. The Torah will not be abandoned. Everything else will be abandoned, but not the Torah. So this is the gift of the Torah, and this is what we celebrate on Shavuos when we recall and when we renew our acceptance of the Torah once more. The Torah is precious. The Torah is that which represents the means by which we can establish a relationship with Hashem, by which a person can find fulfillment in his life, and ultimately the Torah al ta'azovu, you don't leave it either. It escorts you and accompanies you even to the next world after 120 years. So thank you for listening. We've gone over a few minutes, but every week, and we've been counting the days. So some thoughts, and I wish everyone a wonderful Yom Tov, uplifting Chag.